The artwork is a room all in gold, and the room has a very small hole to look inside, and when you look through that hole you basically find a space which is about 4 by 6 meters, and on the floor in front of you, with a straight vision, you see the reflection of a painting of the Holy Siege and the cross of the Virgin Mary. When you look at it, there is this two elements that are very indicative of Neoclassicism. It's the great power, it's almost intimidating, and the fragility of Neoclassicism. There is a very interesting place in the Park of the Pincio outside of Rome, and there is a door with a tiny hole. When you look through that hole, you have the center of St. Peter. For me, that embodies the universe. It also embodies the Mother Church, and then you have this almighty cross that is, in a way, very dominant, but then broken down with the fragility of the Virgin Mary. And again, the gold leaf that is present in a lot of my works is again a part of the temporality that in the end things can fade or can disintegrate. Neoclassicism is basically a period that extended, actually, has very, very early origins that I pointed out, and it is a form of showing power. The combination of the dominance of men or of empires that have been built on the base of the columns of Neoclassicism, or the original idea of this shape that adorn this period with the aspect of religion is always and again featuring art that we are allowed to use as a dialogue and integrate the abstraction into the artwork, like the circle or the squares. And so this is my way of trying to justify this period, because it is hated by many people. It is Neoclassicism itself is a period of very mixed styles. So by cutting certain elements, you bring it back into its very simple form. This is something that is very prominent. Even when you look at the dollar bill, you have the Greek columns, and then it's a cross in the center, and a triangle. And on top of the dollar bill is written, "In God we trust." From my point of view, Neoclassicism And the founding of Neoclassicism has very little to do with religion, because it's really a period that, when we look at our last period of Neoclassicism that failed, this World War II, crumbled. Prior to that, Napoleon was the Neoclassic emperor that crumbled in ashes. There is this very strange and very interesting fact of a monumentality. Neoclassic power, and now we talk about Napoleon and we talk about Hitler, Mussolini, they are structures of intimidation. When you walk into purely neoclassic buildings, you feel very small. So also the neoclassic world vision of these powers was immense. It was almost limitless. Actually, it almost won. But then both of those empires crumbled in ashes. I did my very first exhibition of Neoclassicism in 2017, and I think probably my next one will be in 2 or 3 years. So there is almost a 10-year period in between where I think about it, I read about it, and I see films about it, and the more I learn, the more amazed about the elements of Neoclassicism and how they're used in different ways. Also, the way people today in power, whether it's in fashion, in art, in politics, it is used very, very frequent. Well, I just talked very briefly. I said you find it in fashion. I think a great homage was the Versace universe. It still is. And the way Versace lived, he lived in neoclassic villas. A lot of the work and the furniture is influenced by Napoleon III or the Return of Egypt, the element of gold printing, neoclassic pattern in that brand was extremely prominent, and the shapes, the body language, the physicality of neoclassicism is almost like the Greek sculptures or the sculptures in Germany pre-war and World War II. It goes really back to old Rome to today, and that I think is really interesting, because with what happened with these powers, Neoclassicism comes back. It's like a mushroom. It emerges again and again. And one other element that I find extremely interesting, when I entered the Trump apartment in Trump Tower, it was all gold with columns and patterns, and it was a purely neoclassic universe. And that in the US, also when you go in certain houses of wealth, especially on the turn of the century or up to the 1930s, you'll often find the columns at the entrance. Often it is a very big clash of style, and on the other hand, it gives the villa or these structures this kind of, okay, you are entering this important structure that is held up by these neoclassic columns. And I find that fascinating that just now when you go to LA and you see certain of these monumental houses going up, many of the entrances and doorways and gates are neoclassic structures. And they are representing wealth and power. While gold is, you call your weight in gold. Gold is a most precious material that has so many utilities. It has practical utilities, but it has immense decorative utilities. And there are whole churches that are gold leaves, and I gold-leafed, and I created these spaces that are, when you look, they look like gold mirrors, but when you look very closely, and I did that on purpose, they're tiny little fractions that are coming off the structures of the wall, and you feel this gold leaf is almost flying in the structure because it is so delicate and so light, and also the application of the gold leaf is such a delicate process and gives such an enormous result. And I find that my work is usually very reduced, and I use very little color, and gold is, I never worked with gold before. Actually, I started using gold, and I started to get more and more attracted to gold, and I found it in some amazing works as a base, as well in Japan and in China, which I found extremely interesting. Totally unrelated to Neoclassicism, but the gold, the way it traveled from our altars in the church to these screens in Japan and to the imperial palace in Beijing and all over China, and the use of gold in China and India is absolutely incredible. So it's a material that we adorn ourselves and we use, and it is also an incredible material to use in technology, in isolation or transmission, and we use it in dentistry, we use it in space, this space foils. It is a material that's extremely beautiful and extremely thankful, because if it doesn't come out well, you can melt it down and you can start fresh.